My name is Claire Morgan. I was 34 years old, and I worked as a pediatric physical therapist, helping children learn to trust their own bodies again after illness or injury. 3 weeks at a beach resort had been my grandmother Evelyn's first real vacation since her knee replacement, and I had spent 6 months arranging every detail because she deserves something gentle after years of putting everyone else first. At exactly 4:18 p.m., the receptionist looked up from her computer and quietly told me there was no room reserved under my name. 3 weeks later, a single blue seashell keychain rested on an empty chair, and nobody could ignore what it meant anymore. What happened that afternoon wasn't really about a missing hotel room. It was about years of invisible rankings, quiet compromises, and one decision that finally changed the way my family understood belonging. The blue seashell keychain had followed me since I was 12. My grandfather bought it from a tiny gift shop during our last family trip to the coast before he passed away. He handed it to me and smiled as he said, "Everyone deserves a place by the water." I clipped it onto every suitcase I owned after that. Looking back, I realized that little shell became a strange measure of where I stood in my family. Whenever vacations were planned, birthdays celebrated, or holidays organized, someone always found a better place for my older sister, Vanessa. She was 37, confident, charming, and somehow always considered the obvious priority. If one bedroom had a better view, she received it. If there was one special surprise, it was saved for her. The rest of us adjusted without saying much. Grandma Evelyn never liked the arrangement, but she carried warmth instead of complaints. At 71, she remembered everyone's coffee order, mailed handwritten birthday cards, and somehow made every grandchild feel noticed. I wish I could say I defended her more often when she quietly tried to balance things. The truth is I helped normalize the imbalance by convincing myself that keeping peace mattered more than fairness. That beach vacation seemed different because I refused to leave anything to assumption. On March 6th, I emailed the complete itinerary to everyone. On March 19th, I confirmed the reservation number again inside our family group chat. For days before departure, I even called the resort while my father and Aunt Linda listened on speakerphone. The employee confirmed that our booking covered every guest exactly as listed. I saved the confirmation email, took screenshots, and printed a copy that stayed inside a blue folder in my carry-on bag. When I mentioned wanting to double-check one final time, Vanessa laughed softly and repeated the sentence she had used my entire adult life. "Don't make everything about you." Everyone chuckled, and I folded the papers back into the folder, never imagining that those documents would soon become the quiet evidence of something much larger than a reservation. The lobby suddenly felt much smaller than it had 5 minutes earlier. Behind me, luggage wheels rolled across polished stone floors while children laughed near the indoor fountain. In front of me, the receptionist hesitated before turning her monitor slightly toward the resort manager. At exactly 4:23 p.m., the manager stepped beside her, studied the reservation, then looked at me with practiced sympathy. "I'm very sorry," he said. 7 rooms were reserved. Your name isn't attached to any of them." For a moment, I honestly thought there had been a computer error. I unzipped my blue folder and handed him the printed confirmation. He compared the paper to the digital record, frowned, then quietly explained that the reservation had been modified 12 days earlier. One guest had been removed. The change had been requested by the primary account holder, my mother. The paper remained in his hands while every pair of eyes slowly turned toward Vanessa. She barely looked surprised. Instead, she adjusted the strap of her designer handbag and shrugged. "Don't make everything about you," she said, almost lazily. "Someone had to be left off. You're single. You can figure something out." Those words landed harder than the missing room. Grandma Evelyn stood perfectly still beside her suitcase. She reached for my hand before anyone else moved. "Take my room," she said quietly. "I'll sleep on the sofa. My knee isn't that bad anymore." Nobody cried. Nobody raised a voice. That somehow made it worse. I squeezed her hand and shook my head. "No, Grandma." She nodded once, as though she already knew I would refuse. Then she gently clipped the blue seashell keychain back onto my suitcase after it had slipped loose during the confusion. It was such a small gesture, but it made me realize she had noticed things about me that others never did. Standing in that bright lobby, memories began rearranging themselves inside my head. The promotion dinner where my achievement somehow became a celebration of Vanessa's new kitchen remodel. Christmas morning when my carefully chosen gift exchange was shortened because Vanessa had another party to attend. The family reunion where everyone waited 2 hours for her flight but started dinner without me when I was delayed by 20 minutes. None of those moments had seemed important alone. Together, they formed a pattern I could no longer pretend not to see. The hardest realization wasn't that my family had excluded me. It was that I had spent years helping them do it. Every time I smiled instead of speaking, every time I accepted the smaller bedroom, the later invitation, the forgotten birthday call, I had quietly agreed that my place could always be negotiated. I wasn't only the person being overlooked. I had become the person explaining away my own absence. That evening I drove 12 minutes down the coastline until I found a modest inn with faded white balconies overlooking the ocean. It wasn't luxurious, but the owner found me one available room overlooking the beach. When I carried my suitcase upstairs, my phone buzzed with messages from relatives asking if I had worked something out. Not one of them asked how I was feeling. The next morning, I tried reaching out anyway. I called my father while he was sitting by the resort pool. His voice stayed low. "Claire," he sighed, "it's already happened. Don't ruin everyone's vacation over one room." An hour later, I met Aunt Linda for coffee outside the resort entrance. She patted my arm gently and smiled the way people do when they're trying to avoid discomfort. "You know how Vanessa is," she said. "Just let it go. 3 weeks isn't forever." Neither conversation made me feel angry anymore. They made me feel invisible. Late that afternoon, I called my closest friend, Nina, back home. I explained everything without exaggeration, expecting another polite excuse. Instead, she stayed silent for several seconds. Then she said exactly what nobody in my family had been willing to say. "They didn't forget you, Claire." I closed my eyes. "They chose you." After another quiet pause, she added the sentence that finally gave me permission to stop begging for a place that should never have been questioned. "You don't need permission to stop accepting disrespect." The next morning, I stopped trying to solve a problem that had never really been about a hotel room. I found a small beachfront cottage 12 miles north of the resort. It had peeling white shutters, a narrow wooden deck, and a kitchen that smelled faintly of fresh lemons. It wasn't impressive, but for the first time in years, every inch of that space belonged to someone who had actually been invited. I remember setting my blue seashell keychain on the kitchen counter and realizing something simple. I didn't need a better place inside the old system. I needed a different system entirely. As I unpacked my suitcase, one thought settled into my mind and refused to leave. Peace begins where ranking ends. Even then, I kept one extra chair on the porch because I wanted the invitation to remain open. That wasn't weakness. It was the kind of generosity I hoped would survive all of this. That afternoon, I opened our family group chat 3 different times. The first message I typed was fueled by hurt. I wrote that I was done pretending everyone hadn't watched me disappear in plain sight. I deleted it. The second draft was colder. I listed the dates, screenshots, reservation number, and every person who had witnessed the confirmations. I deleted that one too. Neither message would change anyone's heart. Finally, at 6:42 p.m., I sent only this: "I've rented a nearby cottage for the rest of my stay. Anyone who wants to spend time together is welcome." No explanations are necessary, and no one has to choose sides. 3 minutes later, Vanessa replied with exactly 2 words. "Suit yourself." No apology. No surprise. Just another reminder that she believed the conversation was already over. It wasn't. 3 weeks passed more quietly than I expected. People drifted toward the cottage one by one. Nina flew in for the final weekend. 2 coworkers who happened to be vacationing nearby stopped by with homemade peach pie. The elderly couple renting the house next door joined us for sunset because they heard laughter from the porch. Grandma Evelyn came every afternoon after lunch. She carried fresh fruit, folded beach towels, or simply sat watching the waves. Before our farewell dinner, I placed a small blue seashell keychain beside every plate at the long wooden table. Nobody asked why. They somehow understood. Later that evening, my cousin Daniel quietly called to tell me the elegant farewell dinner at the luxury resort had ended almost an hour early. People had smiled for photographs, eaten expensive seafood, and gone back to their rooms. It felt beautiful, he admitted, but somehow empty. Grandma stood before dessert with one hand resting on the back of her chair. She thanked every person who had helped create a place where nobody needed permission to belong. Her voice stayed steady, and when she finished, the entire porch fell silent before anyone applauded. That moment mattered more than any reservation ever could. Even then, I refused to pretend everything had become perfect. I had gained peace, but I had lost the version of my family I had spent years believing could exist. Later that night, Aunt Linda stopped by alone. She looked toward the dark ocean before quietly admitting something she had never said aloud. Vanessa had grown up believing love was something you won by staying in first place. It explained her behavior without excusing it. As Aunt Linda left, I found myself repeating a sentence I would carry long after the vacation ended. When love becomes a competition, everyone finishes with less. Almost 4 months passed before I saw Vanessa again. It was a rainy Saturday at 10:15 a.m. when my doorbell rang. Through the front window, I saw her standing on the porch, hands buried in the pockets of a beige coat, looking far less certain than I had ever seen her. I finished washing the coffee mug in my sink before answering the door. I wasn't trying to punish her. For the first time in my life, I simply wasn't abandoning my own pace to accommodate hers. When I finally opened the door, she looked past me into the house. "Can we talk? You can come in." She sat at the dining table where my blue seashell keychain rested beside a bowl of fresh lemons. For several minutes, she tried the same familiar strategies. "You embarrassed the family." I didn't argue. "You could have handled things privately." I nodded once, but didn't rush to defend myself. Without resistance, those old tactics had nowhere to land. The silence lasted long enough that she finally stopped performing certainty. Her shoulders lowered. Then she asked something she had never asked me before. "Do you think Grandma will ever trust me again?" It wasn't asked like someone searching for an argument. It sounded like someone who had finally realized what had actually been broken. I thought carefully before answering. "If you want to repair something," I said, "don't start with me. Start with Grandma. She was the one who offered you her room while you watched mine disappear. If she believes your apology is real, everything else can happen naturally." Vanessa looked down at her hands. For once, she didn't negotiate. She simply nodded. A week later, Grandma called me. She told me Vanessa had visited without announcing it beforehand. They spent nearly 3 hours together drinking tea in the kitchen. I never asked exactly what was said. Grandma never repeated it, and Vanessa never tried to summarize it. Some conversations become smaller when other people listen. I only knew they both cried, they both laughed once, and when Vanessa left, Grandma hugged her longer than she had in years. That was enough. The following summer, we returned to the coast. Not to the luxury resort. Grandma booked a simple 6-bedroom beach house herself. Every adult paid the same amount. Every bedroom assignment was written on a single printed page taped to the refrigerator before anyone unpacked. No upgrades. No favorites. No negotiations. When Vanessa arrived, she quietly placed her suitcase beside mine in the hallway. Before dinner, she noticed the small basket of blue seashell keychains sitting on the kitchen counter. Without saying a word, she picked one up, clipped it onto her own bag, and smiled toward Grandma before helping carry dishes to the table. It wasn't a dramatic apology. It was something better. It was different behavior. Grandma moved more confidently than she had the previous year, walking the beach each morning with a folding chair tucked under one arm. On our final evening, she handed me the printed reservation for next year's trip. Every single family member's name appeared on it. Mine included. I folded the paper carefully and tucked it beside the same blue seashell keychain that had traveled with me since I was 12. Looking back now, the missing room was never the deepest wound. The deepest wound was believing I had to earn space that should have been mine all along. 3 weeks changed my life. One missing reservation revealed decades of quiet truth. One blue seashell reminded me where I belonged. Because a reservation can give you a room, but only love that makes space for everyone can truly give you a home.